Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as sceptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of some kind of mashup between different hemispheres. Is probably the best way to do that. This is your regular Still Unbelievable host Matthew, and who have I got on the line here?
You have Damien, the Tall Friendly Atheist Dad.
Excellent, and I'm not long up.
Well, I was going to say, as you can tell from my accent, I may not be in the same hemisphere as you.
Absolutely not. Certainly not in the same town anyway. We can tell that one for sure. So, so we've got in touch because we listen to each other's podcasts as well as doing podcasts. So it's early in the morning for me. It's 8 a.m. on a Sunday. I am usually up because, as regular listeners of Still Unbelievable know, I have chickens and they need getting up when the sun gets up. I have coffee in the morning. I need to have my breakfast anyway. And the wife gets up on a Sunday to go to church. So I'm up at this time anyway. What time is it where you are? Is it 5 p.m., something like that?
Yeah, it's just after 5 p.m. In Melbourne, Australia. I'm looking at my window. There's a very lovely golden sunset happening right about now. Strangely enough, at 8 a.m. this morning, I was doing another podcast. I have another politics podcast called Let's Save the Governor General that I do with a lovely lass from the south of England. So awesome. When we were doing that, she was complaining, "Oh my God, it's so late at night." And I was going, "Oh, I've just woken up. Hey." so it's all like full circle today.
Excellent. I didn't know about that one. I'm going to have to check that one out.
Oh, please do. It's probably not as big as my atheism one, but politics does rankle a few feathers. But no, I've always had an interest in politics and society and culture and just how it all works together. And it's called Let's Save the Governor General. We're not strictly monarchists. So how can I say? There's three people on the panel. One of them is a very staunch anti-monarchist. Me and Phoebe is kind of like a somewhat anti-monarchist, and I'm more of the I don't really care either way kind of guy. But it was just a pithy title that we made up and decided to run with that.
Cool, that's some interesting subjects. Let's run with that for a bit then.
Of course.
I don't have a strong feeling about a monarchy. I know there is a small but growing number of the UK population who would probably wave the anti-monarchist flag.
Mm-hmm. But having said that, though, Matthew, I think there's always been a portion of the British population who have been anti-monarchists. Like you can go back to the 18, 17, 1600s.
True, yeah.
And there's always been this kind of this very small and sometimes influential anti-monarchist movement.
Yes, that's probably very true. I think nowadays they take I think the angle that they take is probably changed over the years. Indeed, I think because in the past, a monarchy were a bit brutish. And whereas nowadays that's not really a charge that we can.
They're more oafish nowadays rather than brutish.
Yes, quite. So I think a lot of people view the monarchy as being a sap on the public purse.
So having said that, it's not so much me personally. It's not so much that I'm in favour of the monarchy. It's more that I'm against the change for change's sake.
Yes.
So if we are going to replace the monarchy, I don't want it to be that we replace it with something just for the sake of replacing it with something because we don't like the idea of a monarchy. I want there to be some sort of functional alternative that we've laid the case out for. Is more what I remember. So back in 1999 in Australia, we actually had a Republican referendum. And much to everyone's dismay, the no vote actually got up. And partly it was because the model proposed was that the parliament would choose a president instead of a direct election from the people.
Yep.
And since then, there's been talk of having another Republican referendum, but like no one, especially in the current political climate, I don't think anyone's really broaching they might broach the topic when Queen Elizabeth passes on, but that probably won't be for another couple of 100 years the way she's going at the
moment. I know. I've only known the one queen, the one
exactly. This is
life, yes.
You are right. It is just so weird. I actually saw a photo the other day where like it was Queen Elizabeth. And it had like, I think, America, Britain, France, and Germany. And it had a timeline of all the different presidents and prime ministers that those countries have had. It's just, oh my God, like I think she is immortal. This is the weird thing.
She is. And I think you're probably quite right about the subject being broached then, because despite what the rest of her family may do, I think she actually commands a fair bit of love and respect because of who she is.
Yeah.
And the the 2012 London Olympic Games opening ceremony, where the Queen actually was involved in the ceremony in quite a comic James Bond mashup. Yeah. And the nation loved it. The nation absolutely loved it. And it was really good. And I think only she could pull that off. I don't think there's another member of her family who would have received quite so much love and adoration for that.
Charles jumping down a parachute.
Yeah, I know.
That would work. But I think one of the wonderful things is that because she's so hands off, that's probably why, obviously hundreds of years ago, the monarchs were a lot more hands-on with how they ran the country, whereas the Queen, this is probably one of the things that's worked in her favour is that she's very hands-off. And even though you could argue that your current Prime Minister is doing such a bad job of running the country, but no, she will let the people decide who goes into the Parliament, and she will sign off on whatever they choose, and it's because back in there's a bit of a history lesson here. Back in 1977 in Australia, we had our own constitutional crisis where the Parliament had blocked supply. And so then what happened was the Governor General had communicated back to Buckingham Palace about how exactly what to do. And eventually the Prime Minister actually got dismissed by the Governor General. And that caused a lot of controversy. But basically, the Prime Minister at the time, Gough Whitlam, had made he'd made a lot of unilateral decisions. Some of them were really good, and some of them were really bad. But because of the toxic political climate at the time, essentially the opposition party had control of the Senate and were refusing to guarantee supply, which is the annual finance bills that Parliament need to appropriate money and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a bit of a stalemate, and eventually the Governor General decided to dismiss the Prime Minister and the cabinet, which led to the famous line, "May God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor General."
Right. Okay.
So that was a little bit of an Australian history lesson, but the Queen didn't get involved at all. It was probably the one time in Australian history that she could have, flown down on the plane and, laid down the law, but she didn't. And so that's the Queen's style, just very hands off, and let the subjects sort themselves out, and she'll keep on petting the corgis.
Yeah, yes, quite. Now, my knowledge on this level of British democracy isn't strong. It isn't particularly great, but I think the Queen technically has the power to dissolve government if she so chooses. And to give you a hint as to where my politics are, I would be delighted if she were to do that.
I'm with you. I'm with you as well. Just because I think one of the jobs that a political leader has is to instill respect and confidence in the office.
Yes,
that they have, and I can't see that Mr. Johnson is affecting that.
No, absolutely not. He is poisoning trust in government.
Yeah, and I think with the whole Partygate thing, I think there's only so many times you can say I didn't know the rules or wasn't too sure what the rules were. I didn't lie to Parliament. No, I absolutely didn't.
Yeah. Yes, but I think there's a flip side though to the Queen exercising that power, if indeed she does have it, in that power might then be subsequently removed from the monarch because the government doesn't want that to be done again.
Yes, that's. But however, the Queen would have to sign off on the relinquishing of her power, because Parliament is subject to the authority of the Queen. So in effect, if Parliament did ask the Queen to not have that power to remove governments, it'll be like the Queen giving up something. And it could happen, but it's a bit of a. I think she would take a much more diplomatic approach if she was asked to relinquish that. But you never quite know. But one thing that does strike me as weird about your particular system is the House of Lords, where people are basically born into Parliament.
Yeah.
Like the hereditary titles and the peers actually get passed down, which is
yes, there is lots of opposition to that, and there are multiple attempts to try to remove that. I don't know why we haven't managed to do it, because I think there's enough support in the UK for that to change. So I can only suspect that there are repercussions to that change which people haven't been able to work out. But yes, that needs to change. But we need much broader, more sweeping powers than just removing our hereditary peers, because frankly they're not actually a huge number of our peers, because there are other peers who get appointed by the present government, and so the government that's in charge at the time appoints the people who they like, and sometimes money changes hands as part of that decision making process. So we also need to change that.
Okay, so that's and I think you also need money to upgrade your Parliament House as well, because I think it was built back in the 1800s and it's kind of falling apart.
Yeah,
is what I've heard.
Yes, which gets on to another way in which I feel about public buildings. We have in the UK a large number of very old buildings, and we have this system of listed buildings where an old building which has some kind of significance, some kind of historical significance for one reason or another. So you get grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 kind of listed. I think grade 1 listed, there's rules about what you can do in the occupancy of it. And where my employer, for example, has a listed building. And so what we had to do was we had to change a lot of the windows in the building last summer.
Well, actually, Matthew, can I stop you for a sec? Is A the higher? Is A the most restrictive category?
Yes. So the lower the number, the higher the category. But I don't know what category my employer's building is. It's in Clifton in Bristol, which is quite an old historical part of Bristol, right? Almost overlooks Clifton Suspension Bridge, which, if you know this part of England at all, it's a very
to a point. It's basically like a football kick away from Cardiff, isn't it?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.
So we had to replace all the windows in the building, and all the windows were timber sash windows. Now, a sash window is where the lower half of the window slides up and down on a cord, which is hidden inside the frame, and it's counterweighted so that it balances. It's quite funky, but it's Victorian technology. It's a single pane of glass, so there's absolutely no heat retention in them whatsoever. So we had to replace all of these windows, and because of the listed status of the building, we have to replace them identical. So we had to replace them with wooden framed sash windows which slide up and down, which in and of itself I don't have a problem with, because they can look nice. But we also had, because the originals are also single pane of glass given their age, we can't put double glazed frames into them. So it completely kills the heat retention of the realm. Thinking, we're putting in this modern building to replicate something that's 100 years old. Why can't we do it using some kind of modern technology so that we can increase the efficiency of the building? No, there's a blatant stupidity in the ruling there. And I'm all for recording what these buildings were like, and then just freaking knocking them down and building something that's fit for purpose. We don't need to bend over backwards, spend ridiculous amounts of money keeping a building in the state that it was 100 years ago. It serves no useful purpose whatsoever for current and future generations. Just bulldoze the whole thing, build something appropriate for the for the location, for the use that it's going to be, so that it meets all of our energy and efficiency and heating requirements. It becomes cheaper to run in the long run, and we can actually build something that represents today's technology and today's stylistic inputs. And if people really want to know what used to be there, we can just put a picture on the wall. We don't need to bend over backwards to maintain these crumbling old stuff. And we should do exactly the kind of same with our Parliament buildings as well. It's utterly pointless and a waste of resources to maintain old buildings in the state that they were.
Tell us how you really feel, Matthew. Don't hold back.
I know. So I suspect that I might be in a minority and it might be a popular view, but that's the view that I hold.
No, I'm kind of with you in that, like, especially when it causes, like, I suppose the question I have, like, in this particular building, is there anything else that represents the historic value of what there is? Like, is there like a facade? Is there like a brickwork pattern? Is there like any hatching?
There is. There's a frontage facade, and it's a representative of the kind of opulent residence that we had at the time, with a dual entry sweeping driveway and that kind of thing. Yeah, but so what? You can record it in documentation. You don't need to have it there visually.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Actually, speaking of which, I'm sure you're very familiar with the TV show Neighbours.
I am. I have watched it, but not for quite some time.
Okay, that is actually filmed in my city.
Really? Okay. I think I knew that.
And I actually drive through the suburb where Neighbours is filmed.
Right.
Out of all, I've never actually driven past the street. The street is basically like 1.5 blocks in from the main highway that I use to go to work. Okay. But I think there's actually an application in the works to protect the frontage of all the streets on this street that is Ramsay Street.
Right.
In Neighbours. So actually, so Ramsay Street is made up of a handful of streets on, I think it's called Pin Oak Court. Right. And there's like an adjacent street as well that they use for outside filming. And there's actually, someone has put in a request for what's called a heritage overlay on the front of the houses that make up the residence of the fictional Ramsay Street.
So does this mean people won't be able to change the colour of their front doors?
Pretty much.
The houses? Yeah.
Pretty much. Well, it depends. If the overlay protects the whole house, they can't really do much. They can only do things to the inside of the house. But if they wanted to, like, build another story or extend it or widen it or anything, like anything that would change the appearance, no. If the overlay is only for the front of the property, then they can do whatever they want to the rest.
Right.
And yeah, it gets a little bit I suppose if you're the homeowner, it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that, hey, you live in one of the neighbours' houses, but you can't do anything to improve the value of it because there's this law that would apply. And it's like I like the charm of the old buildings, but the problem is that to make those old buildings, they would have had to knock over other buildings to put that building up.
Right.
So why not knock over that building, the current building, to put an even more suitable, modern, and like an architectural masterpiece in order to, and then preserve that. So in 500 years' time, when, Matthew's employer decides to knock down their building and make this, high-tech office, then in 500 years' time they can go, oh, look, in 2022 this building was erected, and look what it is now. I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that someone's history is someone else's past.
Yes.
So what we have now will be the past to our children and to our children's children, and 100, 200 years down the track, what we have now, what we think is modern, will just become, something in a book down the line, or a photo, or something.
Yes, absolutely. So on the Neighbours thing, though, did I understand right that Neighbours is ceased filming, or is about to cease filming, and it's all going to come to an end because it's no longer being broadcast in the UK, I believe?
It has. So apparently Channel 5, where you are, was financing the production of it. And they're no longer financing the production of it.
Right.
So Neighbours has officially come to an end. There's probably a few episodes in the can, but what happened was, like, the death knell was spelt for it a few years ago. So I'm not too sure how it works in your part of the world, but where I am, we have 3 major commercial television stations, and what they have is they have multi-channels. So, for example, Channel 7 will have Channel 7.1, Channel 7.2, Channel 7.3.
Oh, right, okay.
Where they have, like they play different like reruns of stuff or whatever. Then Channel 9 has the multi-channels as well. And then Channel 10. So Channel 10 was the broadcaster of Neighbours for decades, like even when I was a little kid. I remember the wedding between Charlene and Scott.
That's the bit that everybody remembers. Yeah,
exactly. And,
that's probably about when I actually last watched an entire episode, to be honest.
There you go. No, I had some of the Neighbours trading cards. It's just strangely enough. That's how popular it was. But I was going to say, so ever since then, but then a few years ago, Channel 10 made the decision to take the broadcasting off of their main station and put it on one of the multi-channels.
Oh, right.
So you wouldn't, unless you had a TV that was capable of playing one of the multi-channels. If you just didn't care, then it's a bit like taking your favorite TV show and putting it on like Wednesday at 10:30 p.m. You're just not going to be up. You don't really care about it. So, and that decision was made a few years ago, and it's more. To someone like me who doesn't care either way, I'm more surprised it lasted this long.
Okay, fair enough.
And it kind of survived because of the Australian government mandate that a certain amount of TV content has to be locally produced.
Right.
So in order to meet that requirement, luckily, Channel 10 had the British Channel 5 to finance production of the show, and it came to an end. But you've got Home and Away there though, haven't you?
Yes, we allegedly. I have no knowledge of that. I'm not going to admit to
That's fine, because
I don't enjoy those kinds of programs. Those serial soaps. It's just not in my DNA to like them.
No, same here. But I had over in Australia, Home and Away screens at 7 p.m. after the 6 o'clock news. So the 6 o'clock news runs for an hour, and then right after Home and Away plays. And so I was watching the news, and then I got distracted by something, and I had Home and Away playing in the background, and I was thinking, what is this trash? It is just so like, if they're going to cut finance for one production, I'd rather they cut Home and Away. At least Neighbours had some class to it. Home and Away is just it's just mass media trash. But no, actually, you raise another point that I want to briefly talk about. My wife is Asian.
Right.
And the way Asians do soap operas is actually quite intriguing. Like the idea of a soap opera running for 15, 20 years is almost unheard of. So what they'll do, that they make drama series, and so it'll be now the plots are all basically the same. Boy meets girl doesn't like boy, second boy comes along, girl likes second boy, first boy tries to win girl. All this kind of trick, and then like the mother-in-law gets involved, or the father-in-law gets involved, or like this concocted drama. And to me, the only real difference is it set in a high school? Is it set in medieval China? Is it set in a corporate office? Is it set in a in something else? But no, they will just make maybe 30 or 40 episodes of this particular series. And then when production wraps up, they will make another series that I would argue is based on a very similar contrived plot. But, and so in China and Taiwan in particular, drama series are incredibly popular. Yeah, so I've been to Indonesia a few times, and you can get entire CDs full of, or DVDs or VCDs of particular drama series, depending on which market you go to. And if you have like a VPN or something, you can access things from Taiwan, and actually not so much mainland China because of the of firewalls and that. But yeah, you get this really. And so this is one of the things about having a cross-cultural marriage, is that like I never watch soap operas myself, but I see my wife watch episode 1 of this particular drama series, and it goes for like 45 minutes and with ads. and then by the end of the night she'll already be on like episode 9 or 10. It's like, oh my god, how long have you been up watching this? It's really nice. Okay, it's the same. And then like maybe the next month she'll be watching something else, and it's like, hold on, isn't that the same actor? Isn't that the same plot? Isn't that what? It's like, okay, whatever. But then she could point the question back at me. It's like, hold on, that show was running 15 years ago, and that is literally the same actor in the same show playing the same character. Like, how many times can someone rise back from the dead or survive a car crash or a fire or something? And
Neighbours had one of those ridiculous plot lines. So, in fact, Dallas famously had one as well, didn't they?
Yes, I remember.
After multiple years. But sticking with Australian television, you guys have had a bit of a renaissance is probably the wrong word, but you've had a surgence of some fairly good shows coming up. I've caught some Australian made shows, probably on Netflix. I'm trying to remember the names, but they're not so much drama, they're cop shows, and I think there's one of Somebody on the Run. And there's one of a couple of girls who crumbs. I wish I should have prepared for this, but I didn't expect us to end up on Australian TV. But what I wanted to say was comparing some of these Australian drama, I'm going to say dramas with the equivalents that we have here in the UK, is your production value is noticeably lower. We've certainly if it's BBC, we've BBC here in the UK has got experience and money, and so you can tell the difference between here in the UK, say BBC and ITV productions. The BBC have definitely a bigger production budget, and the name BBC definitely has the power to bring in better quality people, and you can see that. And I would say that some of your Australian shows are in the middle. They're not quite up to the standard of BBC, but certainly better than ITV. And this is the bit I'm getting to, but you guys have a noticeably different sense of humour, and there's a dryness about hard crime that you guys have, which I absolutely adore. Somebody, just a regular member of the public, seeing a dead body, and the response, rather than panic and screaming, is a real dryness. He's dead, mate, kind of thing. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And that's what I really like about the dramas that you guys are producing that I'm seeing on Netflix and stuff like that. You have a very different sense of humour that touches a dryness that I don't quite see enough here in the UK, and is streets ahead of anything that the USA tries to do.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that lovely compliment of our culture, but we are very... it's interesting having as many American friends. If you're active on Twitter, you'll definitely come across people from America. I've made lots of friends from America on Twitter in the atheist space, and even in the Christian space. And yeah, like being Australian, it kind of almost gives you this permission to be very dry, very sarcastic, very straightforward with how you come across, and almost you're almost expected to swear. I don't know about how British culture goes, but in Australia, it's almost like you're seen as weird if you don't swear.
Yeah.
Because I know that actually this is probably another thing we can chat about, was that when I came out of theism, I took up swearing. Because I was raised to believe that, if you said a bad word, like I think there's a Bible verse in the New Testament says, let not coarse language come from your mouth. No coarse humor, no anything like that. And then I realized that the only people that care about that kind of thing are preachers or, church groups trying to enforce like this good little boy behavior. And then when I took myself out of that environment, I realized that not many people cared that I didn't swear. So I started swearing, and it's like, okay, cool. As long as, and to me, just swearing in the right context, and, as long as you're not doing it to be, I suppose, offensive for the sake of offensive, but, you can always, I think a good swear word can add some humor to a particular situation.
Absolutely. I agree. And I was the same. I almost went out of my way to avoid swearing as a Christian, and I reversed that trend as part of my deconversion, because I needed to get that out of my system. I've balanced back again, and I don't swear half as much as I used to.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
It was necessary. I needed to do it just to get that out. It was part of my decompression.
No, I do get where you're coming from, but at the time I deconverted, I'd been with my employer for about 10 or so years, and I was famous as the guy who never swore. And then, I was just casually saying something to the owner of the company, and I was talking about the traffic, and I said, this morning the traffic was fucked. And he looked at me like I'd shot a baby and said, Damien, did you just swear? Yeah, I did. And then he called one of the sales managers over and said, Damo swore. I was like, guys, you guys swear all the time. I'm just kind of catching up to you. It's it's fun.
Yeah, I've only had the pleasure of one visit to Australia. So I visited Australia because my wife's old childhood friend lives in Perth. And so we visited them for a couple of weeks over Christmas and New Year back in 2000. So a fair few years ago. Yeah. And I remember seeing an advert, I think it was an advert on the telly, and it was a drink drive advert given the time of year that it was. And it basically said, if you drink and drive, you're a bloody idiot. It had a picture of a wrecked motor vehicle and emergency vehicles. Yep. So it was quite blunt and stark, and that is typically Australian. In the UK, that sort of advert would never wash. It simply would not be. The Advertising Standards Authority in the UK, I just can't imagine that they would let that go. And there are huge members of our culture who would be offended by that, yes. Yeah. Whereas you guys are just straightforward on it, and I like that.
Indeed. I was going to say, in some other states have tried something even more edgy. So they had a picture of it, like I said, don't be a, and then what they did was they had a P plate turned upside down to look like a D, and then had ickhead after behind that. So yes, that. And then there was another one that said, I think something like on the roads, don't be a, and then had the letter W in front of an anchor.
Right.
So don't be a anchor.
Brilliant.
And yeah, that got past the advertising people, and it was I don't know if it affected the road toll at all, but it was certainly memorable, because that was about 5 or so years ago, and I'm still talking about it now. So it is a. So
we did a couple of long drives. So from Perth, we drove down to the Margaret River, the wine region, and then we drove north up to, is it Coral Bay or Shark Bay?
Yes, that sounds about right, yes.
Yeah, and possibly a bit further. So we did a fair bit of driving up and down, and I remember seeing bits on the side of the road, and it was a car that looked like it had been involved in a genuine accident on a frame with a sign behind it saying don't drink and drive. And I think we were told that those were genuine vehicles driven by drunk people who had been involved in a genuine incident. And in the UK, that would be over the line, using something genuinely in a situation like that.
But do you have a drink driving problem in the UK? Would you say it's a...
I wouldn't say it's a problem. It has been in the past. 30 years ago, when I was younger than I am now, it certainly was. But we do have regular anti-drink drive campaigns, and the police are out on the roads, certainly in the run-up to the Christmas period, pulling people over much more proactively, and any kind of... and then obviously, because so we have a breath testing system, obviously, and whatever our limit is, so the police get quite harsh on that, and they monitor locations, and so they become very proactive in pulling people over.
Okay, just out of curiosity, do you have any of those reality TV shows like Highway Patrol where will have... Okay.
Yeah, we do, yes.
I actually think they're a great. I actually quite like them, because you actually see police on the beat, police doing their jobs. You see a softer side of cops as well. I actually don't mind them. Like the other week when I was driving my kids to school, I actually drove past someone who was getting pulled over, and so they were like these two cop cars came flying around the corner, And then like a couple hundred meters up ahead of me, like the cop cars had pulled someone over. So when we drove past, out of the first car, there was a policeman who got out. And then in the second car, there was a camera crew running out behind the policeman. Like we started waving. It's like, hey, we're going to be on TV in a few months. But yeah, no, it's...
yeah, we do have those. And I have watched a few of them. And you're right, they do a good job of humanising the police and seeing some of the stuff that they actually have to deal with. You know, they're not everybody's being picked on, and sometimes the people that the police are getting involved with are sometimes really quite nasty people.
Yes, indeed. Whereas you look at like cops from America, and it's like, you know, they're taking down, you know, rapists and like stuff like that. And it's like, oh my god, okay, all right. But no, one thing I do find weird about both our cultures contrasted with America is that we technically don't have church-state separation.
No.
If you think about
it work better.
Well, this is the weird thing. It is like, when you think about it, Queen, Her Majesty literally has her own church.
Yeah.
And one of her jobs is to run the Anglican Church.
Yes.
And
I think I'm going to say, going back to our earlier conversation, I think it's a hands-off approach, which has probably been influential on it being less, what's the word I'm looking for? No, not obsessively. Whatever word it is I wanted, but it just makes it that the impact that the church has on the population is reduced as a result.
Yep. Yeah, it's so when contrasting with our American friends, and I think Andrew, there's something that Andrew could relate to, where it's almost an official doctrine in America that there is a church-state separation, but religious fundamentalism seems to creep into a lot of facets of life, particularly if you live in the southern states.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Andrew. I should have mentioned Andrew at the top. My apologies, Andrew, when you listen to this, for you not being part of this. Damien and I are just having this conversation because I've had the week off from work, and I just put a shout out on my Twitter saying, anyone fancy a conversation? I've got the time, I've got the capacity. It's relatively early in the morning for me here. Andrew's probably still fast asleep. We have got a plan to have a specific conversation with Andrew, so we're not going to do that. That is not what this conversation is. This is just a filler chat. We are going to have that conversation with Andrew about a specific feature of Christianity. Because of the 3 times I was involved, it's become quite challenging to do. Andrew and I have only managed one conversation with somebody in Australia before. There are practicalities which are awkward in trying to do it. So it's still on the schedule. We're going to work it out.
Indeed, yeah, we will. And so, yeah, the three time zones. Like with this with the Let's Save the Governor General podcast, what helps is that one of my co-hosts lives in Tasmania, which is in the same time zone as where I live.
Yeah.
And the other person is in England, and so we can kind of balance that. But add America into the mix, and it does get a little bit. And I do have to apologise because the last few months my work has gotten a bit busier as well, and some of the hours aren't quite what I'm used to, and just getting around that. So but no, I would love to interact with Andrew at some stage, and have that. Cool. Have that chat. Yeah, it's just one of those weird things. Like in Australia, I think the way that we do religion is fairly similar to how you guys do it, in that, like, it's good. Congratulations on having a religious belief, but don't force it down our throats.
Yeah,
is the way is the way to do it. And I think there was even pushback against. I know there was a guy whose YouTube channel I spent a bit of time on, where he even is protesting against peers in the Lord's House having their position because of their religious position.
Right.
Which is I forget the details, but he was against bishops and that having peerage in the House of Lords, and so okay, all right. Whatever.
Yeah, see, I don't feel that strongly. I'm okay with having our bishops or our archbishops, whatever, having a place in the House of Lords, because I think the House of Lords needs to, as much as possible, accurately represent a cross-section of the population. And that means there needs to be Christians and other religions also represented in that.
Yep. And I think as soon as we start discriminating against people on the basis of their religion, it becomes like this pointing fingers and, you know, this actually kind of touches on something this was an argument up until a few months ago. Australia's in the middle of an election campaign at the moment. So in 4 weeks' time, we go to the polls to vote for our federal parliament. At the beginning of the year, beginning of this year and end of last year, the government tried to pass what was called the Religious Discrimination Act. So there was a committee set up a few years ago to examine the rights that religious people have in Australia. And one of the things they found was that there's no specific discrimination act that prevents discrimination on the basis of religion. And so the government attempted to pass a religious discrimination act. But one of the things that they fell over was that the act would possibly give schools the power to expel LGBTQ plus students and staff. So if you're working at particularly at a religious school, and someone found out you were either divorced or, you know, closet homosexual or transgender or anything like that, then they would have the power to expel you on the basis of whatever offended their religious sensibilities.
Yeah.
And so that legislation, it got committeed. So basically, it got sent away to a committee, which is sort of like the go away pile, the too hard basket. And now that the government's called an election, they're not going to worry about it until the next parliament, and that's if the current government gets returned.
It's a delicate path to take that. Where do you draw the line between a religion is allowed to have its own internal rules of behaviour, and that religion's rules of behaviour are oppressive towards others? Because surely at some point a rule of behaviour is at some level oppressive, depending on how loosely you define oppressive. So where do we draw the line between a religion can have that level of oppression and a religion can't? It's a delicate thing, and I think as a society we're still trying to answer that question ourselves.
Indeed. There's a part of me that says allow religious schools as much discrimination as they want, as long as they're completely upfront about it.
Okay.
Which is like, if you're going to be a bigot, then you must advertise that bigotry so people know that if they're going to put their kids in your school, then they will know that this is the kind of stuff that you guys get up to. Whereas if you send your kids to a public school, then there's a lot more restriction about what. So I think that one of the problems that this intended legislation had was that while it's meant to protect you from discrimination against you on the basis of your religion, what it doesn't seem to stop is the ability of you to discriminate against someone else on the basis of your religion.
Yes, and I think that's where the problems are. A few years ago, we had a big thing about allowing gay marriage here in the UK.
Yes.
And at the time that was going through our parliament, I just so happened to be working in London.
Yep.
And so for a couple of weeks, I will get off a tube station, walk past our Houses of Parliament to the office which I was working at, and then back again. So, and we have quite a tradition here in the UK where people are allowed to openly protest on a green outside our Houses of Parliament. And so that happens, and what tends to happen is news cameras are there. So I would see these people protesting their points of view about the potential legalization of gay marriage.
Yep.
And it was mostly Christians opposing. There were people obviously in support as well in response to the opposition, and there were news cameras there. But I remember walking past it and seeing this shouting, the yelling, and the banners. And the thing that went through my mind wasn't the rights and wrongs of it all, but I don't see anything dignified in the way these protests are being carried out. Yes, it's their right, but it didn't feel dignified, and it didn't make me want to go and talk to those people. I just wanted to get past them and get on to where I was going, either to the office or back to the hotel.
Yep.
But going back to your point, people are allowed to protest, but if two people who are same-sex attracted are in love with each other and want to commit to each other publicly in a ceremony for the rest of their lives, and they've not got any religious attachment to themselves, at what point in that conversation, in that equation, does religion get a chance to have a say in it? And I think that's what's going through my mind here. If these people are not religious, if they have no intention of being religious, if their ceremony is not going to be religious, why does religion get a voice in how they're going to live their life?
That's actually a good question. Maybe because religion believes it has the mortgage on marriage. You know, I distinctly remember numerous Christians coming out and saying that God instituted marriage. The Bible instituted marriage. Marriage is a Christian institution. And I couldn't help but think that if you wanted a biblically proper set of laws regarding marriage, then you'd have to ban divorce as well. You'd have to ban divorce, but you then also have to allow polygamy, because there are numerous scriptures that allow polygamy.
Yes. Interesting, that one. I'm trying to remember exactly what I did believe about marriage. I certainly believed it was a Christian institution because of what is it in Genesis where it says about a man will leave his mother and father and go and live with his wife,
become one flesh.
So I always took that verse. I'm pretty sure I always took that verse as, you know, God's authority on marriage. And as a result of that, I think I looked down on a wedding that wasn't church-based. If people had a registry office wedding and then went straight off to the hotel.
Actually, I was a lot like that. If someone had just had a registry wedding, there's like, oh, you're not really trying hard enough. You're trying to spit in the face of the church. Yeah. You're trying to replicate what you want, what we have.
Yes, I remember one of my brothers getting married in a registry office and telling that. And I remember standing there as a Christian thinking, this isn't great. There's not enough people. You know, where are the songs? And I was judging it from my expectations instead of appreciating my brother's wedding for being my brother's wedding. In some ways, I wish I could relive that without my Christian baggage so that I could appreciate it for him more appropriately. But obviously that can't happen.
No, I do know where you come from, and this is the thing, that fundamentalism is its own little cult. It kind of and look, I have to admit that I still have some of the fundamentalist baggage myself, and I'm working through that. And I have transgender friends and homosexual friends and all that who are, you know, showing me their side of life, and I definitely don't judge them for anything. It's just a matter of, you know, if you want to convince me of your position, I'm more than happy to listen, and I've had my mind change on a few things. But but it's just this whole thing that a lot of the anti-gay marriage arguments were God will be unhappy and think of the children. And if you think about it, like if you're going to use those arguments, then one, you have to ban divorce. You know, and I don't see any Christians protesting against divorce, and I don't see any Christians protesting against single-parent families. Like, for example, let's say a woman has a child and her husband dies in a transport accident. You know, do you then, because you're thinking of the children, do you then make her get married ASAP? So that the child has a father figure, even if the woman has no love or affection or how can I say, or any attachment to the guy that you forced her to marry, then you know, if you're going to do it for the sake of the children, then how far does that go? And so I think that the religious fundamentalist position is very myopic, just in that sense.
It's funny hearing you say that. It sparked a memory of a conversation that I overheard decades ago. It's when I must have been 9, maybe 10 years old, my parents were going through a very unamicable separation. And my dad was with somebody else. And everyone was professing Christianity. The school that I was going to in Zambia at the time, was a school for missionary children. So everybody was Christian. Everybody affirmed Christianity. So I have this memory of my dad picking me up from school. It was with this other woman picking me up. It was, as you can imagine, an extremely traumatic time for me because at that age, for me, divorce was not only painful and hurtful to me, but also morally wrong and against God's law. So for me as a preteen, it was immensely traumatic on multiple levels. And I think a lot of the people around me, adults included, really were unsure on how to handle this situation. But I remember my dad overhearing my dad having a conversation with another dad, was a parent of because it was the end of term, the mass pickup, so all the parents were coming on to side to take children, because it was a boarding school in a remote part.
So that
was right. So boarding school, so end of term, all the parents mass pick everybody up, and the whole day is a celebration day, and the kids do some things in front of the parents, and then all the parents stay overnight, and then they all get taken home the next day.
Okay,
so
nice.
It's a very, very, very different scenario to what people might be used to terrestrial schools, schools in the UK, etc. So anyway, so I'm with my dad, because I haven't seen my dad for multiple months. So all the children are hanging around their parents because they haven't seen them. So I'm with my dad, and he's talking with one of the other dads about staying over, because for some of these parents it's a 2-day drive back home again. So it's an overnight stop on the way home. And my dad's talking with this other parent about staying over at their house, and the other parent says, well, I've only got the one spare room. And my dad says, it's okay, we can share a bed. And this other parent says, no, you won't. And I don't remember any more of what was said after that. It could well be that I recognised an uncomfortable situation and ran off to play because I didn't want to be there. But I remember that, and so what you've just been saying is triggered that memory, and I don't know what conclusion to come to it from, or how I feel about it now, reliving it all those years later. But that's the kind of thing that was going on, and that was the culture that I grew up in and lived in, and seeing my dad having been in and part of that culture for my entire growing up, and then suddenly still profess Christianity, but for this other woman completely live against it quite openly and blatantly, was really, really problematic for me. And I think that was where a lot of my relationship trauma came from. When I say relationship, I mean my parents' divorce trauma. Is moments like this, and trying to meet and match what I saw and what I witnessed and what I heard said with what I believed, and then what I was then experiencing in the breakup of my parents' relationship.
Yeah, actually, I kind of, and that's kind of triggered me. We're playing a swap bad childhood memories here, because unfortunately, my mum was an undiagnosed schizophrenic.
Right.
And she came from a very abusive environment, where her dad, or my maternal grandpa, was famous for his bad temper. Right. And my stepdad grew up in, just trying to think, have you ever heard of the Stolen Generation?
The what generation?
The Stolen Generation.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, this is a bit of a controversial topic, but back in I think from about the 1900s till about the 1960s, there was a government, I don't know whether it was a law, whether it was a policy, but what happened was that child welfare authorities would take Indigenous children from their parents and raise them in mission schools.
Wow.
Yes. But what also happened, so my stepdad was Indigenous, but what also happened was that they did that with white children as well, where if the government decided that if your parents weren't fit to be parents, then they would take the child and put them in some sort of orphanage or boys' home, or I think they call it a reform school or reform park or something like that. So if you were Indigenous, you're more likely to go to like a Christian missionary school and learn how to be white and speak English and be given an English name and basically forget your culture. Whereas if you were white, you went to, actually, I'm just going to see what they actually Google what the actual name of it was.
I have such strong feelings about that practice. I really do.
Well, it's kind of horrible just to think that this is what we did to our children. This is, it's.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to think what actually. No, it's very hard to find on the wiki machine. But it was basically like almost like a medium security prison for boys who didn't have parents and. And that was, and I could tell that my stepdad had the trauma of that and the insecurity of that into his adulthood. And so, unfortunately, my mum being highly insecure and my dad also being highly insecure was just a bit of a toxic environment. And that was one of the reasons I actually turned to religion, was because it gave me that security that whatever happened, I could trust Jesus to help make things better. Okay. Lockyer Park Boys Training Center was what it was called.
Right.
And I think Boys Training Center kind of makes it sound like a college or a a bit like university or something. But no, it was basically a medium security prison.
Yeah. So it was so they were gender segregated as well then.
Indeed, yes.
Boys
Boys
center and a girls center.
Yep, correct. Yes. And there were plenty more. I think there were plenty more boys' centers around than there were girls, but they were definitely gender segregated. Whereas in the Indigenous system, and I use system in inverted commas, is just that you were chucked into usually a Catholic-run school, and unfortunately, as we're seeing in Canada, that the health outcomes of people in those facilities wasn't always guaranteed.
Wow.
So it's a bit of a dark, But this is the thing: those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So I think we should learn from.
Yes, we should. And
learn from history.
This touches on, like I said earlier, strong feelings of mine, because having grown up in a missionary environment in Zambia, Central Africa, which still is part of the British Commonwealth.
Oh, it still is. Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Zambia is part of the British Commonwealth, and having grown up in a missionary environment, in a missionary culture, going to a school in a remote part of Zambia where the only language that was taught and spoken on the school was English, even though we would sometimes get a Zambian student because his parents, for one reason or another, were either able to afford to send them to the school, or him or her the school, or ended up in a scenario where it was paid for them. I don't know how they ended up. But anyway, you'd get a local indigenous Zambian coming to the school because it wasn't exclusively white. But they would arrive at the school knowing no English. And so their first couple of terms would be learning English in an extremely uncomfortable environment, and there weren't many people. Some of the teachers maybe were able to speak whatever language they had, because Zambia is a culture of multiple indigenous languages.
Yes.
And so they would struggle the first year until their English became good enough to be able to understand the lessons, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be, and that's what it was, and their culture was Christian. The only cultural thing that I remember learning growing up there was the Zambian national anthem and Independence Day for Zambia, because it was mandatory in Zambia that Independence Day is a day off. So on Independence Day, 24th of October every year, we would have a celebration around the flag. The flag will get raised. We'd sing the national anthem, and before any kind of public event, I used to do a lot of swimming in my teenage years. So before every swimming event, we would have to have the national anthem and stand for the national anthem before the public event would take place.
Okay.
So we had that kind of thing. So that's pretty much all I remember from the culture. I know very little about indigenous Zambian beliefs or indigenous Zambian cultural activities, because it was all Christian, what I was brought up. And while I adore the country of Zambia, and while I adore many of the experiences that I had growing up there, they're pretty much, without exception, tainted with Christianity, because that was the culture in which I grew up. It was missionary, evangelical, white Christianity. Yeah,
I was a whitewash. Your experience was whitewashed.
Yes, absolutely so. So I don't know enough Zambian culture, which,
even though you grew up there,
I spent my first 18 years growing up there, is embarrassingly shameful. But that was the culture in which I grew up.
Yeah, that's and this is one of the things that we've noticed is that people, even though they may have had good intentions, and as I say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Even though they had good intentions, the problem is that you're basically killing the local culture and trying to transplant your own culture in that. And I think it's just a little bit weird that you can spend 18 years in Zambia and not know much about it. And like that kind of relates something I wanted to say. Like, for example, my wife is from Indonesia. And so when I would go over to her parents' place, we would stay at her parents' place in the outer suburbs of Jakarta, which is like the biggest the biggest city in. And you actually learn so much by being with the locals. You learn their language, you learn their customs, you learn how they do things, and you can kind of compare it with your own, and you get this really immersive experience. And this is the thing that I think the fundamentalist practice of religion takes away, is that it's basically Jesus or bust, and like white Jesus or bust.
Yeah.
As well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So but where I want to springboard from this is back to the British Commonwealth, because we were talking about the Queen and her relationship with other nations earlier on. And because Australia is still part of the Commonwealth, and you hinted earlier about there are mumblings in Australia about maybe leaving the Commonwealth and no longer having lovely Queenie as your head of state or whatever status it is that she has. But so the question I want to ask, because I feel like I'm no longer qualified to have an opinion on this, even though I probably should. In what way do you think religion and the Commonwealth are tied together in nations like Australia and other Commonwealth nations?
I'd have to say that only on a superficial level. Probably the most religious that we'll get in public life is that at the start of each parliamentary session, they do say the Lord's Prayer.
Oh, really? Okay.
They do indeed, yes, but they also say a welcome to country, which is sort of like an acknowledgement of the indigenous custodians of the land as well. So there's that. I know there is a parliamentary Christian fellowship, and a number of MPs do, I suppose, publicly describe themselves as having some sort of Abrahamic monotheistic faith.
Right.
But I think the reality is that I think they're ostensibly atheists myself. So the problem I suppose, is coming to a head now in that the current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is a Pentecostal, and he's like the Hillsong variety Pentecostal, right, as well. And that's kind of bit him on the backside. Sorry.
Yes, because Hillsong are battling their own controversy at the moment, aren't they?
Yes, because what's happened, so bit him on the backside the first time when apparently this is when Donald Trump was still president. The rumor was that Brian Houston, the head of Hillsong, tried to ask Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, to get an official invite to the White House to see Donald Trump.
Right.
Because Brian Houston and Scott Morrison are apparently mates in behind the scenes. Just trying to think what else. But then last year, Brian Houston was charged with concealing a child sexual offense, because what had happened was back in the I think early 2000s or late 1990s, Brian Houston's father, Frank, had come out and admitted that over the decades he had been abusing young children, especially back in New Zealand where they're from. And because Brian Houston was the head of the Assemblies of God, which is now called Australian Christian Churches. There's a great name. Brian Houston was effectively in charge of reprimanding his own father. And so instead of going to the authorities, Frank Houston got a golden handshake and retired and sailed off into the sunset.
Yes, I remember seeing a documentary about that. I think this is on Netflix. There's a documentary about that, and I remember seeing this suggestion of was it Brian covering up the sins of his father. And I remember when I watched that and he denied knowledge, and I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not sure I believe that denial.
No, exactly. But then it gets a little bit worse in that I think it was either last month or the month before, Brian Houston admitted to spending time in the hotel room of a female member of staff when they were away on conference, and of sending inappropriate text messages to women employed by the church. So that caused Brian Houston to step down from, when he was charged, he stepped down from all these boards attached to Australian Christian Churches and Hillsong. But then these couple of revelations that came out caused him to step down from the, what do they call it, the global senior pastor position. So he stepped down from there. And then his wife was made redundant from her role as assistant senior global pastor. And so Brian Houston came out and said, Hillsong have lost their heart. They don't care about people and all this kind of stuff. And it's just ironic that Hillsong under his leadership showed a very callous disregard for people. But then I'll finish up with this story. Scott Morrison then came out and said that, I haven't been to Hillsong Church for 15 years. I don't know what you're talking about. But then footage was played where Scott Morrison was at one of the Hillsong conferences praying on stage with Brian Houston back in like 2015 or something.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a claim that can be fact-checked. You need to be sure and certain.
And it was fact-checked, and it kind of plays into, now I don't want to get too political here, but Scott Morrison does have a trust problem with the Australian public. There's been a few incidences where he hasn't quite been above board with his public statements, and then they get fact-checked, and I went, oh, sorry, I misspoke, I misrepresented that, I didn't have the full information at the time or something. It kind of plays into this mindset that Scott Morrison is a Christian trying to protect his Christian friends. And this kind of goes back to the Racial Discrimination Act, in that he's trying to give Christians a free pass to discriminate against people of other religions or non-religions. Bit of an interesting situation we have here in Australia. And in 4 weeks' time, when we decide, if the Australian public decide they don't like that kind of Christian nepotism, then they shall vote out the party that represents it.
So just to clarify that then, so literally in a month's time, you guys are going to the polls and you may well have a new Prime Minister.
Indeed, yes. So I think Saturday, 21st of May is when the election. So the election was called 2 weeks ago. So it's a 6-week lead up to the election, and so we're already 2 weeks into the into the campaign. But the campaign has been going on for about a year, because they've been sniping at each other. Like both parties have been sniping at each other for a long time and trying to point score. But so 4 more weeks time, and we'll. And this kind of is another thing that really surprises me about the American experience. And I think this will be the same as yours, is that in Australia, we have a body called the Australian Electoral Commission that oversees elections. There is none of this like county by county, state by state, running their own show. Once an election is called, the Australian Electoral Commission has the authority and is charged with providing a free and fair election that is all completely above board.
Right.
And it's just interesting. So in America, literally each state and each county run their own election. So they run their election and then provide the results up to the next appropriate authority, who then provide it to the next appropriate authority, and it goes up the chain. Okay. Whereas in Australia, we have one body that that hires the bingo hall or the church hall or the school hall or something, and they provide the pieces of paper and the ballot box, and they do the advertising and say vote here, and if you want to vote early, well here's where you can vote early, and if you want to mail in your votes, well you have to apply. But we send you a form, you send the form off, and it's all completely above board. Even in remote indigenous areas, the Australian Electoral Commission will go above and beyond to make sure that indigenous people of non-English speaking backgrounds, material is produced in various different languages, all that kind of stuff. And I actually worked on a project for the Australian Electoral Commission late last year, and there are security requirements that you have to abide by to make sure that it is all above board.
Right.
And so it's just interesting listening to Americans complain about their electoral system and go, how can we fix it? It's beyond repair. We don't know what to do. And said, "Hey guys, look down here. We've got a pretty good system. You might want to listen to take a leaf out of our book. All that kind of stuff."
Yes, quite. So I don't know when you're going to edit this audio for your own podcast, but for Still Unbelievable, this audio will probably go out after you've already had your election. So now's your chance to tell the future. What's your reading on how it's going to go?
Oh, Matt, you're a funny guy. I think as of, what's the date? The 24th of April. I think that the Australian Labor Party will win a majority in the House of Representatives, which is the lower house, and where government is formed. And I think they will win that by a very slim margin. I'm going to say 4 seats. So they'll get a 4-seat majority and won't need to form a coalition with any other parties.
Okay, so that will be a change of government then for you guys.
Yes, correct. Yes. So we'll go from a conservative government to a more centrist government, though with left-wing leanings.
Okay, right. And just so that I understand, prior to Scott Morrison, were you a Labour government before that as well?
No. Sorry.
Because you had a female PM, didn't you, before Scott?
Well, we did indeed. Yes, your memory of Australian politics is somewhat correct. So we have had the equivalent of the Tory party in Australia is the Liberal Party.
Right.
Which kind of is a little bit funny because you associate Liberals with like left-wing leaning kind of things, but no. Yeah, so they've been in power since, I think, 2013. But what has happened is that, was it 2016? I forget exactly the years. But what has happened is that we've changed prime ministers 3 times. So what happens in the Australian system is that it's actually the party that has a majority in the lower house. The leader of that party is then the prime minister.
Right.
So one of the things about that is that the party can have a special general meeting where they call for a spill of positions, and whoever wants to nominate for the leadership can then nominate for the leadership.
Right.
And so it's happened that currently Scott Morrison is the prime minister. He won the last election back in 2019, and that was seen as a bit of a miracle. Frankly, I think he actually said, on his election night speech, he said, I believe in miracles, and this is one of them. But he initially became prime minister when he toppled Malcolm Turnbull. Malcolm Turnbull was basically a very progressive prime minister. He was actually the one that introduced the legislation for same-sex marriage.
Right.
And he was also trying to introduce legislation to make binding targets for climate change and all this other stuff. Malcolm Turnbull got into the prime ministership because he had overthrown Tony Abbott.
Now that's the name I remember.
Yes, because he is actually Australia's trade envoy to the United Kingdom.
Okay.
And he's buddies with Mr. Johnson in 10 Downing Street. Yes, I think that says all you need to know. But before Tony Abbott was prime minister, he had overthrown. He had defeated Kevin Rudd in an election, but the problem was that Kevin Rudd took the top job from Julia Gillard.
That was the female name I was trying to remember.
Yes, that is Julia Gillard. So Julia Gillard was Prime Minister for just short of 3 years. So in Australia, they're 3-year terms, and she was Prime Minister for just short of 3 years when the person that she overthrew for the job, Kevin Rudd, got his job back by basically white-anting her authority and her standing within the party. And so it's all a bit of a tawdry situation where, you could argue that Australian politics is still in that tawdry situation where it's a bit of where nobody likes each other. It's one of those things. But Julie Gillard probably the only professed atheist prime minister that we've had.
Right.
And it's just one of those things. So basically every prime minister that has been either Catholic or Anglican or Presbyterian, or in the current case, Pentecostal. But no, Julia Gillard was the only, I suppose, outspoken atheist that we've had, and I will say that I don't think she did a good job, but I think the cards were stacked against her in the first place.
Right. Okay.
So it's a bit of interesting, but no, I think this is actually one of the topics that we do cover on Let's Save the Governor General. I'm going to give that one another plug. Let's save the governor.
You do that. It's funny you say that about the way she was treated, because I think our previous female Prime Minister Theresa May was somewhat maltreated by the male establishment in British politics.
Yep. Given that you had numerous people literally celebrating when Margaret Thatcher passed away.
Yeah. Yes.
It's kind of like that's but no, one of the things actually you do make a good point that Julia Gillard was the target of very gendered attacks. So a lot of things about her personal appearance were criticised. The fact that she was unmarried, she was criticised for. The fact that she didn't have children, she was criticised for. I am absolutely dead serious. So she had a partner, but she didn't have a husband.
Oh, really?
So that was seen as an attack. There were people who called her, like they went on the fact that she didn't have children, or all this kind of stuff. At the worst of it, there was just trying to think how to put it. Julie Gillard was planning on implementing a carbon tax. So if a big company was going to pollute carbon dioxide into the air, they had to pay a special fee for that. That broke an election promise. There was a big protest out the front of Parliament House about it, and there were literally signs that said "Ditch the Witch."
Wow.
And there were signs calling her Bob Brown's bitch. Bob Brown was the leader of the Greens Party, and there were signs going, Bob Brown's bitch, ditch the witch, all this kind of very gendered attacks on her.
Oh, yeah, the ugly side. Hey.
Yeah, indeed, yes, yes.
I mean, obviously, if you're going to break an election promise, you've got to expect some pretty robust pushback against that, regardless of how well-meaning and how potentially good the policy change is, but you're still breaking a promise.
Well, indeed, but I don't think gendered attacks like that. Actually, there's one incident there I was also going to mention was that on Talkback Radio, there were people asking questions such as, do the Australian taxpayers pay for her tampons?
Oh, really?
Well, fucking hell, really? That's, like just dumb shit like that. And it's, it was just like a very, just like that. Like, even if you don't like the job she's doing, don't stoop to that kind of level, that was a,
well, I can tell you with utmost confidence, I do not think that any British tax pounds are spent on hair gel for our current Prime Minister.
I don't even think there's a hairdresser involved anyway. I don't think there's a comb. I think just Morris just wakes up like that and goes, this is how I'm gonna look today.
Yep.
It's
quite
politics, but actually I'm very surprised, to kind of swing back to what we were saying before, I'm very surprised that Mr. Johnson hasn't been ousted yet. I'm very, very Because I think when one of his, I saw the video of one of the members of Parliament going, "For the love of God, go."
Yeah, there are some Tory people who are some Conservative members of Parliament who are calling him to go, and they are most certainly on the more sensible side. My local MP, where I am, is a Conservative MP, and I've written to him a couple of times asking him to add his voice to the pile of people who are calling for Boris Johnson to go because of his poor integrity and the way that he's bringing Parliament into and the country into disrepute. And I've had no acknowledgement.
Okay, so I was going to say, hasn't Cressida Dick resigned because of the fiasco as well? The head of the police.
She did resign, but no, I think she was outed more over, not because of what was going on in politics, but over issues that happened on her watch in the Metropolitan Police.
Oh, okay, all right.
So that was the reason for her ousting. Life was made so uncomfortable for her because of what was going on that she was forced out. I think that there was gender play involved in that, but at the same time, it was misogynistic behaviour and blatant disrespect of the female gender within her own police force that caused the appalling murder of a woman by a serving police officer a year ago.
Yes.
And so she was already, Cressida Dick had already generated some bad feeling, and that murder and the way that and the fact that was a serving police officer and the stuff that uncovered contributed.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there was very vocal female lack of support for the Metropolitan Police, and I think that was really unhelpful towards Cressida Dick. Whether or not she deserved to go is complete. I don't think I'm qualified to say, but certainly with females in London, she had lost support, and maybe that was enough.
Well,
but I don't think it was directly related to what's going on in the Conservative Party.
Oh, okay, all right. But I'm sure it's just a funny coincidence that.
Yes.
But anyway, these funny coincidences sometimes do happen.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But we do need more females in strong and senior and public roles like that. I'm absolutely supportive of that.
Yep. I'm with you there. If you're qualified, we do need more qualified females, and if we can't find qualified females, let's help create some more qualified females.
Yes, absolutely. And moving on a big tangent on that, but staying on the gender subject, I work in IT. I've worked in IT for my entire working career, and I can probably still only count on one hand the number of females that I've worked with over those years.
I'm with you as well. I work in IT, and the number of female IT representatives, like in your level 1 positions, is very low, and the number of females in management positions is even less.
Yeah, and I'm very much in favour of more females, more women working in IT, because I think the IT department needs to more accurately represent the diversity in the rest of the business.
Yep.
And it typically doesn't.
No, it is a bit of a boys' club, I have to say.
So there we go. So that's my little thing. So what do you do in IT?
Oh, okay. I'm actually I'm doing a help desk stuff at the moment. Okay. I'm working 4 days a week at a military parts manufacturer.
Okay.
And that, so you
probably can't tell me much in detail on that, but you
exactly. I know if you're familiar with the F-35 planes, the company I'm working at provides I think wheels and brakes, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And they're also helping develop a drone as well, which is you're right. I can't say too much, but
right, okay.
Yeah, but no, but I've been in. So that's currently I'm doing that now, but I've been doing like server relocations and data center stuff, and
cool.
And in a previous life I was a photocopy technician. And that's an even more gendered industry. I think I've only ever met one or maybe two. Actually, no, I was trying to think. Am I getting things confused? But yeah, the number of field technicians in IT is yeah. Like if you think the help desk side of it is very gendered, yeah, the actual field side of it is.
I absolutely can believe that. Yeah. So I'm a software developer, but in our IT department we have help desk as well, and sometimes I have to help out with the help desk. We're a business that employs a couple of hundred people around the country in various locations. So reliable IT infrastructure is important for the running of the business.
Oh, indeed, yes. And, yes.
I write software that is used by about 130 of our employees in the business, and that's going to grow over the next 12 to 24 months, going to grow quite considerably, possibly even double. So it's important that my software works, and it's important that we have a reliable help desk, and it's important that we have a developer that can keep on top of the job. So recently hired a couple of other developers, so I've now got a couple of developers working with me. I'm no longer the only one, but we're all men. Yeah, we're all men. We haven't got a female developer. I think we interviewed one female candidate when we did the round of interviews for an additional developer. So they are out there.
Yes.
This candidate is trying to go on for a second interview, which is unfortunate.
Because I was going to say the other thing that I do notice is that unfortunately I've come across where females are hired for their looks as well.
Yeah.
Not so much for their ability, but more just so they're eye candy for the guys to look at and give attention to, and yeah. Let
me say up front, this is not something I subscribe to, but for many years I have been familiar with the phrase within IT that goes along the lines of women in IT are either good at their job or good looking, but you don't get both. And when that kind of attitude is so regularly repeated, it's going to sit there, and then that's going to fuel and feed the misogyny at the top, which then fuels and feeds the attitude which they have when it comes to interview.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, no, I agree completely.
We need to stop that, and I'm going to be quite vocal in calling that out if I ever come across it again. I'll back it up by saying it's not something I've heard now for several years. So let's be hopeful that attitude is no longer in existence. Certainly not in the circles I'm working in. I'm not going to say it's very possible it still exists elsewhere, and let's shame that and let's get rid of that, because it doesn't help. It doesn't help our job. It doesn't help the men who do the job, let alone the women who want to do the job.
Indeed. I'm glad things are changing. I think how you go about that change is important. You really do need everyone on board. But if everyone's head is in the right place and they realise that you can only get better with better representation, then I have a teenage daughter. She is growing up, and she's not too far from being an adult, and I want her to have the same opportunities that I did, and I want her to be able to get into any field that she wants because of her qualifications, not because of physical attributes or what she's got on her chest or between her legs or her backside or anything like that. I want her to be confident and mature and smart and headstrong. And I'm doing my part to help her with that. It's just about if I came across something as blatantly sexist as some customers that I've walked into, it's like, well, but as I said, I'm glad things are changing, in that my daughter is growing up into a world that is better and more egalitarian than what I grew up in.
Yes, absolutely. My daughter's growing up and planning on going into a working world where her ability and her confidence to call out misgenderism, or however we want to phrase it, where she has that ability and that confidence to be able to call it out, whereas it wasn't that many decades ago where women just had to put up and shut up and just deal with the system as it was and do their best in a system that was stacked against them.
Don't be a troublemaker.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas now women are more empowered to actually speak out against it, and long may that be the case.
Indeed. I'm gonna wrap it up, if I can wrap it up shortly. I've got kids to look after and things to plan for tomorrow, and
Okay. Yeah. Fine. So, absolutely. Thank you for this chat. It's been pleasant. Just before you go, there's something I want to call out. I should have done this right at the beginning, but people are going to have to wait for until the end. I want to give a shout out to a couple of Facebook groups for people who are in our position, as in former Christians, wherever you are on your status, be from in transition from Christian to atheism. Maybe you're a doubting Christian, maybe you're like me, you're a hard-nosed atheist. There are a couple of Facebook groups that I'd like to promote. One is called Born Again, and the other one is called Deconversion Anonymous. They are both Facebook groups that are geared towards people who are deconstructing, doubting and questioning your Christian faith. This kind of subjects that Damien and I have been discussing for the last hour and a half are certainly the kind of things that are welcome there. If you want to rant about your experiences of Christianity, or just ask your own searching questions about where you go now in your deconversion or deconstruction journey, they are going to be safe groups for you. You'll find sympathy and you'll find support in those groups. So if you're not a part of either of those groups, or you haven't joined either of those groups, I would like to recommend both of them, because you will find that there'll be a friendly community waiting for you in both of those groups. That's
what we need, atheists supporting atheists.
Yes.
And to get to the point where you can be comfortable around religious people and in religious ceremonies and talking with religious people.
Yes. Absolutely. Anything that you want to call out and shout out and promote besides your podcast again, Damien?
Yes. So again, I'm gonna plug Let's Save the Governor General. That's my Australian politics podcast that I do with Phoebe Rose and Clancy. If they do listen to this, hi. My wrestling podcast. I do a pro wrestling podcast with a guy called Mr. Lightning, who is an independent wrestler himself. So Wrestling with Atheism. So yeah, we've got a few episodes there, and because I've been a lifelong professional wrestling fan, so that's
you're a busy guy, aren't you?
Yes, something like that. And my main podcast is the Tall Friendly Atheist Dad podcast, where it's more of a personal look into me, and I give my personal thoughts on a lot of things. I go on rants. My last episode, as the time of recording this, my latest episode was with Deborah Grace, who is the author of Crucifying the Bible. So had a bit of a chat about how she came to be deconverted and why she wrote her book. And one of the other things that we spoke about was the blowback that she gets in response to her book, and some of the misogynist comments that she gets and the pornography she gets sent to her because she is an active female atheist. That's a bit heart-wrenching towards the end, a bit disgusting.
Man, don't be like that, really.
Yeah, don't, exactly. Come on, guys, make us look good. And before that, I took a leaf out of your book and responded to Braxton Hunter's 10 Questions for Atheists.
Yes, I need to listen to that. I've seen you've done that, but I haven't listened to your answers, so I need to.
The man himself responded. Well, he gave me like a thumbs up and waved hi, and it was like, hey, cool.
Excellent. Cool. What we should do is next time he does one, we should join forces, and you should come and we can do a. I was going to say threesome. You, myself, and Andrew. We should hit them all together. That would be quite interesting.
That would be, yes. And I do have I know Cameron Bertuzzi from Capturing Christianity put out his 3 questions for atheists that I've actually got lined up in about 4 weeks' time.
Have you? Okay, I'm looking forward to that because we responded to that one as well.
Yes, it's like I'm following you guys, metaphorically and literally as well.
You're going to have to, you're going to have to jump in there ahead of us at one point.
Good.
We have got another questions one. Frank Turek did a 4 questions that prove Christianity. I kind of responded similarly. So Andrew and I are planning on doing a response to that one. It is painful. It's a bit like twitchy. The first 10 minutes of Frank's podcasts made my skin climb off my back and jump into the bin.
Well, actually, I haven't
made it to the end of his podcast, so I need to give it another go. But yeah, it was awful.
No, fair enough, because I was going to say the other thing I want to plug is my YouTube channel. If you go onto YouTube and search for the Tall Friendly Atheist Dad podcast, I actually do a reading series where I read books from both the theist and atheistic perspective and just give my thoughts on that. And one of the books I'm doing is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Right.
I've done 17 parts. I'm probably into chapter 4 at the moment. I'm probably only a quarter of the way through the book, because when I read a paragraph, my blood pressure rises, and there's just so much bad argumentation and inanity and straw men and equivocation, and yeah, he really is one of the worst high-profile apologists.
He's awful, isn't he?
Out there, like you got Braxton Hunter, who I think is a genuine stand-up guy. You know, who's very friendly, very honest and sincere, and then you have Ray Comfort and Frank Turek, who are apologists, and that's the best thing I can say about him.
Yeah, I would add John Lennox to that list of bad people in that space.
Indeed. Anyway, Matthew, I might run.
Yeah, okay. Have a lovely one, Damien. We will catch up again online at some point and communicate. And
indeed,
we will have that conversation with Andrew as well when we can schedule it in. Thank you so much for sparing your time this Sunday evening.
Oh, Matthew, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to catching up with Andrew as well and doing a three-way. Keep interacting with you on Twitter, because some of the stuff that you say I really respond to and it resonates with me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers. Have a good one. Good day, mate.
Thank you so much, Matt.
You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.